Hello and welcome to the Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm your host, Macy Renee, and we are going on a journey together, my friend. If you've been looking for a podcast geared towards your growth, self-awareness, navigating your brain's daily mind drama, and deep inner work to become your highest and best self, you are in the perfect place. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Your Highest Self. If you're a new listener, welcome to the podcast. So excited to have you. And if you're a returning listener, thank you for being here. Y'all, I wish that you could hear what I have to do to make sure that I'm going to have a quiet space. Like I have to tell my dog, do you want to get a bath? Because he hates getting baths. Because if not, he'll stand at the door where I record the podcast and just bark and cry and scream. And I have to turn on a movie for him. It's amazing what I have to do for this little 3-pound Yorkie to keep him entertained so that I can talk to you guys. Oh gosh. Okay, well, I hope that you all are doing well. I'd love to remind you that if you're an iTunes listener, to keep me on the charts to make sure other people can find me. If you listen to this podcast and you've never left a written review, can you please go do that? I would so appreciate it. I do my best to try to keep from making this podcast a paid thing. So every episode has been from my own time. I love doing it. And there are options for me to be able to get paid doing the podcast, but that would mean interrupting you guys with commercials and ads, and interrupting the message of the podcast to share different ads for products. And I don't want my podcast to become that. Personally, I don't love when other podcasts have that. It sometimes interrupts the flow of the message for me whenever they're talking about a random product, 15 minutes into the podcast or 10 minutes into the podcast. And so I don't want to have to do that. And to keep me from getting to that place, reviews and word of mouth and sharing the podcast with your friends and just saying hey, there's this podcast I listen to. I really love it. I think you would like this. And if you're an iTunes listener, coming on and leaving a written review, it helps me remain on the charts. More people can find me that way, and it means a whole lot to me. So if you don't mind to do that. All right, let's get started. Today we're going to talk about prepping for the holidays, because it's around that time where maybe some people, despite COVID, will go spend time with their family for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, the holidays in general, maybe some friends, small little gatherings and parties. I know that there's some people who are going to say that that's irresponsible, but some people in the world are going to be doing that. And the holidays can be very stressful when there's an uncle, Bob, that's not so friendly, or Aunt Janice, who's always up in your business. And you want to be able to enjoy the holidays, right? It takes a lot of highest self work and self-awareness to be around people that are different than you and not have thoughts about how much you can't stomach them, right? There might be reasons why you can't, but you always have the opportunity for that to be different. And I want to come on here today to share with you some tools that may be helpful for you when you're in groups of people, whether that's around mutual friends and maybe there's a friend in that group that you just bleh, or family members, and you find yourself dreading the family event because you're just so and so is so blah blah blah, and I don't want to go because they're going to be there and it's really obnoxious and they always blah 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 and whatever it is, right? So I am getting ready to finish a book called The Zen of You and Me. I bought the book years ago. It jumped out of the bookshelf, basically. I was in this store that I absolutely love in Lexington, Kentucky called Squeshel Media, and I call it the woo-woo store because it has things like sage and incense and crystals and books and gag gifts and journals and paper goods and just all. It's really, really an amazing place. I love that store. I hope that they've survived from COVID, because I haven't been back in probably a year, but they have a huge selection of books, like yoga books, spirituality books, personal development books. I mean, you name it, they have it. And I would go there and just let my intuition guide me as to what books drew in my attention and made me pull off the shelf. And years ago, one of the ones that I pulled off the shelf was called The Zen of You and Me. And I had started to read it, I think multiple times. I've probably read the first chapter more than 4 times. And I have this thing where I'm a serial book reader, and I'll start a book and then I'll move on to another book and then another book and then another book, and never end up finishing a physical copy of a book. And when November 1st hit of this year, I decided that I was going to do 6 things. I've shared with you guys some of what those are. I every day make sure that I'm meditating either in the morning or at night. I'm doing 365 days of Facebook Live. So if you're not my friend on Facebook, be sure to friend request me so that you can be a part of the growth of just even watching me become, right, who I become over the next year. It's pretty exciting just to see that transition. It's pushing me outside of my comfort zone. And so you can be there from the beginning. We just hit day 15 yesterday. Day 16 will be today. Let's see. I am also learning Italian. I am making sure that I do some sort of physical activity like the gym or in-home exercise every day. I self-coach my brain daily, and I'm trying to think of what the other one is. I always forget one, but regardless, I'm not going to come here and try to keep thinking about it. Oh, finish a physical book. Finish a physical book. And so what that means, it breaks down to about a chapter. I read a chapter every single night. And this book, The Zen of You of Me, I've been reading, since November 1st, and I'm almost done with it. And it talks about the whole concept of the book is learning to have enough self-awareness and emotional intelligence to be able to get along with anyone, no matter what their viewpoints are, no matter how different they may seem. And it's funny because it falls in line with the work that I coach on anyways, but there were so many ahas in the book. And she talks about how what brings us together in childhood, right, is sameness. So the reason that we are in the family that we're in and we have the childhood friends that we do is because there are things that make us very much the same. And she talked about it being in early childhood years. And the way that I interpret that is especially during those first 7 years of life, where I've told you guys we operate out of our subconscious. Everything that we experience our first 7 years of life automatically, because of how our brain waves operate those first 7 years, gets stored subconsciously. And we don't have the ability to kick it back or say, I don't want that thought. I don't want to believe that. So if your parents, let's say the first 7 years of your life at any point, struggled with money, lived paycheck to paycheck, said money doesn't grow on trees. Do you think I made a money? We can't have that. We can't afford that. We can't do that. Other kids can have that. You can't have that. You can't afford to go to that school. I know you want to go there, but you can't afford to go to that school. So this is like a money example. If you heard a lot of that your first 7 years of life, all of those experiences and the way that you felt then are stored in your subconscious programming. So it's stored in your body without you even having to think about it. After age 7, and you get to like 8, 9, 10, all the way up to your teenage, young adult years, your brain waves change and you have the ability to start questioning things that you were taught. So in your teenage years, you might say, well, why can't we afford that? Or why can't we have those things? Or, when you say that we'll never be able to afford blah, 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 how come? Why can't we just get a different job or try a different career, go to college or start a business, right? So when you get older and your brainwaves change, you have the ability to question everything that was absorbed in your subconscious that you recognize. That's the key, right? That you recognize. If you don't recognize it, it's still a program that's running in the background and driving your decisions. So if it's not a thought that's been addressed, it's going to continue to run at a subconscious level without you being aware. But when you become aware of something, and usually you become aware of something because you don't like it, it doesn't feel like what you believe in, you begin to question those thoughts. And so she talks about in this book that we initially are with the people that we're with because there's sameness and there's things that draw us together. When we get old enough to question and learn a little bit more about who we are and what we agree with and what we don't, we begin to recognize differences. And so this is when we may fall out of a friendship with someone that we loved in childhood, because as we're older, as we're teenagers or whatever, we realize that their interest and what they love may be different than our interest and what we love. And so it's at that moment in the world where we realize, okay, there's differences in people. Like, people are different than I am. And what happens a lot of the times is we don't know how to cope with those differences. So in teenage years, when this childhood friend that you were friends with forever, starts saying, well, I want to do this and this is what I'm going to do. And, maybe they're like, I'm boy crazy and I like to party and I want to go hang out with the popular crew, or, I'm smoking, I'm drinking, whatever that is, right? And you grew up with this person. This is just an example. And you realize that's different than what I want. I want to do something completely different. I don't want to party. I don't want to be out every weekend. I want to hang out with, really good friends, but I don't want to do it at the expense of smoking and drinking or whatever, right? And so what this does is it creates the first level of division where we are divided only because we start to see very clearly like there's differences. And each time that you separate from the sameness in someone else, it feels like a death, right? A lot of times when that happens in the moment, it feels really bad and we don't really love that feeling. But the core component of this book is that she says when you learn that there are differences with other people, what that makes you do is turn inward inside of yourself to realize and ask yourself really hard questions of who am I? What do I want in my life? What's important to me? What direction do I want to go? How do I want my future to look, right? And it causes you to take an inside look at who you are and who you desire to be. And until you make that choice to turn inward and ask yourself, who am I? Who do I desire to be? What do I want in my life? It's very easy to navigate the world people pleasing and trying to be in sameness, because when you're not in sameness, that division, that difference that you see can feel like a death, right? It feels like all my life I've been close to this person. Now, because I'm discovering myself, I'm turning inward, I'm figuring out what it is that I want, I'm having to experience the feeling of loss. And we don't like that. As humans, we don't like that feeling of not being liked, not being loved. If we're a people pleaser, we have a hard time not people pleasing, right? Because we have this perception like this is how I am liked and loved. So if I'm different than that, or if I suddenly start saying no, if I start speaking my mind, if I start telling people what I really think instead of holding my tongue, they're not going to like me anymore, right? And so the purpose of turning inward and doing the self-awareness work is getting very clear on who you are and what you want, and being okay with there being that temporary, what could be temporary division. Because once you discover who you are in a deep level and you have filled your cup, that's what self-awareness work, self-mastery work does, is it begins to fill your cup, because you start aligning with who you are completely, authentically, transparent, right? You become exactly who you are at your core, and you start embodying that. When you do that, your cup is full. And so you begin to realize that the differences that are in the world are not a bad thing, but that when your cup is full, you have the ability to hold the space for people and their differences. And when you can hold space for people and their differences, what you will often find there are things that make us the same. And so it comes full circle again, right? Now, the issue is that a lot of us have a hard time holding space for people who are different than us, who have different opinions than us. And that comes from not knowing yourself very well inside and out. That means your cup may not be full. If you go around people and they trigger the ever-loving bejesus out of you, and you cannot stomach them because they think so much differently than you. They operate so much more differently than you. And you cannot even handle like who they are as an individual, right? And you're thinking, oh my God, like we used to be so close. I don't understand like how this has happened, or I don't understand how we're in the same family and we're raised by the same people when you are over here and I'm over here. And it feels very difficult, right, to coexist with people sometimes that are very different than us if our own needs are not met. And those needs being that you know who you are, you're getting what you want, you know what you desire, you know how to operate in that and navigate life, exploring your own inner work. That's why we do the inner work. Because until your needs are met at that level, the people that you're around who are different than you will come across as very triggering. Because it's like, how can you be so different, or how can you not understand, or how can you think that way? But when you have self-mastered, and you're even beginning the process of self-mastery, you have this ability to sit in difference. You have this ability to sit in what many people would consider chaos and not be affected at all. And the reason is because when you know yourself inside out better than anybody else, right? You know yourself to your core. Your needs are met. You know how to fill your cup. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. It does not have the same weight emotionally in triggering you, in bringing up a bunch of drama, because you're clear on who you are. You know who you are. So when it comes to the holidays, think about if in the past you've been triggered by Uncle Joe or Aunt Janice or whatever it is. And if that's your name and you're listening to this podcast, I have nothing against Uncle Joe's, Uncle Bob's, Janice's, nothing. Those are just the names that literally randomly came out of my head, out of like thin air. I don't know. But if you have these people in your life where in the past it's been very hard to coexist and you're dreading your own family events or gatherings because it just feels way too hard to coexist with someone, you need to turn inward and ask yourself what you're missing for you. Get very clear on your message. Get very clear on who you are. Fill your cup, because then you don't feel the need to argue or respond, or even you will not be triggered in the same way. I can tell you that when I'm around my family, there are huge differences between my family and I, like certain family members. And there for a while, it used to be very hard for me to be around family because every time they would bring up a topic, I knew our opinions were going to be totally differently. And I would feel quote unquote activated, where it's like my blood pressure is rising, my anxiety is, going through the roof. I'm annoyed. It's obnoxious. I can't listen to it. I need to go leave the room. And when I began to turn inward and do the work on myself and really started to strengthen my mindset and my emotional intelligence, I could stay in a room of a very heated conversation, or where there's tons of differences in opinions, or where I don't agree at all, and still be able to hear the side of a person that if you laid it all out there, we would be maybe considered enemies, right? Because of how different our beliefs were. But that's a big key, is being able to hold space and listen, even if that other person can't do that for you because they aren't doing the work on themselves. You have so much power to change the way that your relationships are in your life. You have so much power to do that. But it takes a lot of hard work on your end, right? It feels so much easier to say so-and-so needs to change who they are so that I feel better. If so-and-so is going to be there, I don't want to be there because they blah, blah, blah. If you're doing that, you're maybe not on the right track at this moment, but that you can pivot. And you can turn inward and say, like, what is it that I'm needing? I need to get very clear on what I believe in. I need to get very clear on my thoughts that I'm having about this other person, about how that makes me feel inside, about why I'm being triggered at a subconscious level, about why I'm wanting to run or flee or fight. Like when you get very, very clear on that and you make that yours to figure out rather than so-and-so needs to change because they trigger me, that's a really big thing. That's called healing from the inside out. And when we heal from the inside out and we have clarity on exactly who we are, we don't need anything from anybody else. And we can hold the space for them no matter where they're at in their life because we're not becoming activated or triggered in being in their presence. We have way too much clarity for that. So I wanted to encourage you to think about this for the holidays. Think about the people that have maybe triggered you in the past or continue to trigger you to this day, especially after all of the chaos that we've experienced in the world this year in 2020. I think a lot of people have seen that there's huge differences and that we've had a lot of division. And in order for us to come together, if that's what you desire, you want to come together and you want more unity and connection and love and just that feeling of I know who I am and I allow people to be who they are around me because I also want to experience that. I want to be who I am, right? Without being shunned or hated. It always starts with us. It always starts with us being able to do that first because we teach people, even energetically, how they can treat us. We teach people how they can be in our energy. And if you're not willing to do that for someone else and you're waiting for them to change themselves before you do anything, you've gotten it all wrong. You're giving your power away and you're putting your power in the hands of someone who may not ever care to change, evolve, grow, turn inward, look at what they need. So you have the ability to do that and really get clear on who you are and what you want and what you desire and who you want in your energy and how you want to be as your highest self. And when you've done enough of that work, you can be around anybody and be able to hold the space for whatever is happening without that huge trigger of your body telling you to flee the situation because there's differences. Instead, your body will say, this is more opportunity for me to explore what's happening inside of me that I don't agree with and, get more clarity in my life. And in those moments, like you're able to bring in unity and see more sameness in other people about how maybe we're all afraid of expressing who we truly are because we're afraid of the reactions or what's going to happen if we show up as who we are. But don't we want that long term? Don't we want to show up and be around people who are authentic and transparent and not putting on a show? Like, I think that that's something that's very important to me is that I want people to be who they are. I want people to show up authentic and transparent. I don't want people to lie to me. I do not like a liar. And I want people to be able to be who they are around me. And when I'm triggered by who they are and who they're being, I always consider it more work for me to do internally. I go to those triggers. I think of the reasons that I'm frustrated. I observe all of the thoughts that I'm having about them. And I really try to get clear on why it is that I'm experiencing that in my body, right? That I'm experiencing that in my mind. And I use that information that I'm getting from turning inward as a way to better myself. And as a result, every time I better myself, when that person shows up as who they are, I'm less and less and less triggered. Because the more I know who I am, the less I have to worry about who they are. They're not influencing me. They're not trying to change me, right? It didn't matter if they were trying to change me. If I'm clear on who I am and I have enough self-awareness to know where they're coming from and I can hold the space for them no matter where they're at, I know that their life and their story has nothing to do with me. And let me tell you, it makes family gatherings, friendship gatherings so much easier to go to when you realize that just because you're holding space for someone and listening to what they're saying doesn't mean you have to adopt their ideas. It just means that you're emotionally intelligent enough to recognize your own triggers, not explode on them, hold the space for it, right? Learn something about yourself, And in turn, it makes everything so much more enjoyable, because it's not about they're trying to change me. They want me to believe what they need to believe. You don't even have to go there. Holding space for someone and listening to where they're coming from is an act of understanding and bringing together sameness, unity, right? And just because you're holding the space for someone who is the complete opposite of you doesn't mean that you're agreeing with them. It just means that you know yourself well enough to hold the space. You're emotionally intelligent enough to hold the space. That if you become activated and triggered and you experience negative emotion, that it doesn't mean that you have to lash out at them for their differences or what they said that brought about an internal trigger in you. That emotional intelligence is observing that you're activated and triggered and still being able to hold the space for them, and knowing that they're not jumping into your body and making you feel a certain way or, trying to change the way that you're thinking. That instead, those triggers are for you to understand what it is that you deeply believe, what it is that you're thinking about. What do you think about them when they say it, right? And as you continue to hold that space for them, you realize that you are who you are, and you can be who you're going to be, and they can be who they're going to be, and nothing actually needs to be different about them, just like nothing needs to be different about you. And that we can have unity and sameness even through our differences. But it's very hard to achieve that if we aren't taken care of, meaning we aren't doing the work on ourselves. Because what our ego will automatically do is come in and say, they're different than me, I don't like it, they need to change so I feel better. If they're going to be at Christmas, if they're going to be at Thanksgiving, I don't want to be at Christmas or Thanksgiving because they trigger me and I don't like the way that I feel. And when you do that, what you're saying is, I don't have control over my emotions myself. I don't have control over my body myself. Somebody else controls everything about me. Someone else controls how I'm feeling. Someone else controls what I'm thinking. And that is why that anxiety comes up around being around people. Because if you're not in control of your own thinking and your own feelings, it's not going to feel good being around someone who's different. In order to hold space for people who are different, you have to know who you are. You have to know your triggers. You have to observe that you're having the triggers as their differences are communicating with you, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to lash out and hate them and need them to change. You know that you're doing the self-mastery work when they can be exactly who they are and you don't need them to change to hold space for them. You don't need to run away. You don't have to cuss them out. You don't have to lash out, punch them in the throat, flee, cause a scene, have all the dramatics. That's when you know that you're really doing the work. When you can feel yourself maybe having the trigger, but you can come back down to yourself and say, that's for me to explore at a later time. There's nothing wrong with me holding space for someone who's different, because it doesn't mean that I'm agreeing with them. Just because I'm sitting here with them, listening to how different they are and how different they think and how different their actions are, it doesn't mean that I'm condoning it or that I'm agreeing with it by sitting here. By sitting here, I'm learning how to become a better listener, and I'm creating sameness where it would be very easy to see more division and more difference. That's our work. How can we create more unity, love, connection with our own family, with our own friends, with groups of people? We need that. We need a world where we're emotionally intelligent enough to hold space for the differences, because that's where we learn where we have sameness. That's what we need. And the problem is that it's very hard to do. You have to be willing to do more work on yourself and more work on yourself and more work on yourself, because you have to understand yourself from the inside out. You have to know your triggers. You have to know why. You have to understand your thoughts. So if this is work that feels very difficult for you and it makes it hard for you to have a thriving relationship with a spouse, with in-laws, with friends, with family members, and you desire to be to have enriching relationships, but it seems like it's always a problem and you need help with it, that is something huge in my work in self-mastery. So be sure to reach out if you need that help. All right, you guys, have a very happy week, and I will see you all next Monday. Bye. Hey girl, did you know there's a place for you to continue this work outside of the podcast? Well, there is, and it's called Becoming Her. This is my online and ongoing coaching container for self-mastery. Everything takes place online and is the best value for your investment if you're wanting to work with me. This is for women that want to create lasting change by learning how to master themselves, their energy, their mindset, and how to do the deep inner work. It's a growing community where you're supported for life with live online trainings, access to all previously recorded content, and 2 one-on-one coaching calls with me per month. It's an investment where you can rest assured you'll have everything you need at your fingertips and where there's one primary goal: becoming your highest self. If this has been something you're looking for, join us and be a part of the growth. You can find out more information on MacyRenee.com.